you explain the difference between a beat sheet, a treatment, and an outline?
A beat sheet, a treatment, and an outline. It sort of depends on who you're working for, especially in the TV world. There are so many interchangeable things that we call different things. For me, the beat sheet is a very skeletal list of what the moments are in your script. Joe goes to the gas station to get cigarettes. Joe finds a turtle running down the street and goes after it. Just very skeletal kind of descriptions listed on a page. To me, that's a beat sheet. A treatment is more, I think, especially in the TV world, it's more analogous to what we call, two things. We have this thing called a story area in the world of TV, which is a general description for usually the studio or network to say, here's the overview of what we're doing in this episode. Here are some of the characters. It involves this creepy town. Our protagonist is going to discover this and this about himself. These sorts of mysteries will get revealed, and it gives kind of atmosphere and energy to invite them to say to us, go ahead and write that. That sounds really juicy. So that's more of what I would call a treatment, which we call story area in TV space. And the outline is, in the TV world, I often think of it and have heard it called a narrative outline, which essentially is you take the beat sheet and you write what I call the short story version of your story from beginning to end. So if it's Joe goes to the gas station for cigarettes, that first section of your outline is going to say, it's a sunny Tuesday and Joe stumbles into it's going to give me more of an energy of what's happening with the character, what the locations are, what perhaps some of the energy, does he walk inside this gas station and has an interaction with a surly gas station clerk? I'm not going to include dialogue, but I'm going to say that. I'm going to give some feeling, some moment-by-moment short story kind of feeling about that story and give that for every scene in the episode. And usually in the TV world, comes to about 10 to 15 pages. And that's where anybody can pick that up, not knowing anything about my show or my character, and really get the download and the flow of the story. And so that's like a fundamentally different kind of document that kind of gives every moment in a narrative description.
How much time do you spend outlining a story, and how do you know when you're ready to write the screenplay?
I spend as much time outlining a story as I feel like the story needs. It's sort of a matter of how much the story needs and how impatient I get. And that's when I know that it's time to move on. Like if I'm really energized and ramped up to jump into the scenes are sort of popping off the page to me and I'm feeling called by them. That's when I'm like, okay, great, I'm ready. And that's definitely once it's all down. I really have to get to the end so I really know what all of those scenes are. And then there just comes a moment when I feel pulled toward creating dialogue and knowing more about those moments. And it tells me, I think, in a way, as odd as that seems, it just says it's time.
Well, you seem very disciplined to me. Maybe, I don't know if that's true or not, but...
Sort of.
Okay.
Sometimes.
Well, but
depends.
It seems convincing, but do you notice that with some of the people that you work with, though, that maybe they do, for lack of a better term, sort of an ADHD, and they want to just jump right to stuff, and it ruins it in the end because, or there's holes in the story?
Yes, I do notice that. I see a lot of writers who are really impatient to get to all of the juice of the story, which I understand and I respect. And at the same time, my concern for them is that, and I spent a lot of time doing this myself earlier in my writing process, where I would start things and I would only get so far. I used to write attempt to write lots of short stories and short pieces or novels, and I would only get, I would just peter out at some point because I had no idea where I was going. There was no structure, there was no energy, there was no guiding force, there was no log line, there was just that one scene. And so I try to steer people toward the outline space and walk them through that process simply to give them enough structure that then on some level, once you've thought that much about it, even though you'll continue to rewrite, there's a way in which it almost writes itself. You know, you just know, like, okay, this moment is here and it's going to lead into this other moment. And then that moment's going to lead into this one and that moment's going to lead into this one. It becomes much easier to move through a story when you have that, the architecture of it already worked out. So I really urge people to move to that space before jumping into those later pieces.
So to go back to Joe at the gas station, there's going to be a reason. It's not just going to be a random scene where he needs cigarettes. He's going to bump into someone, or the clerk's going to accuse him of, you know, your ID doesn't look like you. This isn't, you know, and there's going to be, that's going to set off a sequence.
Yes, there are definitely going to be those things that kind of clue us into other things about Joe and what he's like. What, you know, maybe you know, why is he smoking cigarettes at all? Is he nervous? Is he restless? Is he anxious? Is he desperate? You know, and how much money does he have to buy them? Does he have not much? Is he spending his last? All of those things are going to hopefully be clues that tie us to some of the later events that then make the story that much more fun.
What's your research process?
My research process is, it tries to be thorough, but it's also all over the map. And a lot of it depends on what I'm up for. I try to open up to the space of the possibility that I can get what I need almost anywhere and that I can decide I've had enough at almost any point. So often I will start out with books. I will say, well, what books can I get? You know, how can I may buy things, or I may go to the library. I'm a big documentary watcher, so if I can watch either a long or a short documentary on YouTube, that's cool. Or if I can have somebody, you know, help me do research. But the thing that I love the most about research is really to talk to people. You know, I'm often saying, well, you know, I'm working on a piece now and I reached out to somebody who I went to college with who's a physician. And I was like, tell me about your job. Like, what happens in hospitals and how does this work? And that's so much more fun because the person has, you know, they're there to answer all my questions and to also give their own personal reflections about not only here's what happens, but here's what it feels like, and here's what's frustrating about it, and here's what I love about it. And all of those things start to inform. And then I feel like there's a moment where I just feel like I've had enough. Now, you can always do more research. That's one of those things. You can research for the rest of your life. And so I have to decide at some point, this is good enough to get me started, or this feels like enough to write this scene. And, you know, and I can always come back. I can always, you know, take that piece, share it with the person I talk to, or rewatch the documentary and then rewrite the piece. But I do get to a point where I just feel like, okay, I have enough to know how to fashion this dialogue and what the scene should feel like, and I'm just going to dive in.
What about when it comes to a crime story, and maybe you're doing a brand new one, it's not based on a true crime event, but you can't necessarily maybe speak to someone that's incarcerated or law enforcement or an attorney. So how do you research that?
It's both documentaries, research, or imagination, things I've read. You know, what would it feel like to be in this circumstance? I also think this is where my acting background comes in handy, because I can cultivate pretty well from my imagination what certain circumstances feel like. You know, I can't know all the details of being incarcerated, for example, but I know what it's like to be lonely. I know what it's like to be isolated. I know what it's like to be, you know, in a room by myself. I know what it's like to watch the clock and feel trapped. You know, I know what it's like to watch the sun sort of move across the sky, or to watch an insect crawl across the room, or, you know, I know what all those things are like. And so, so I rely on those things when I don't have other things, and, you know, and those bits of research that I can have, I bring along with me, and then I see what happens, you know. And that's also where, too, on the other side of it, to have readers, to have other people to chime in and say, oh, well, I love this, but I'm missing this, or this seems cool, but what about X, or it might feel more this or that, or have you thought about this? You know, that also helps me kind of round out my approach to anything I haven't lived and I haven't been able to research.
You spoke earlier about riding on the subway and stuff. I think in any major city, taking public transportation or a Greyhound across country, I mean, you can just soak in so much
Yeah.
fascinating situations and some things you don't want to be around, but you have no
Yes.
choice. You're kind
Right.
of stuck. And then others that you're like, wow, I wonder what that's all about right there. And to someone with an active imagination, it can be a gold mine.
Yeah, it's cool. There's also something useful about the kind of isolation of that, or the I guess I want to call it like being trapped in a way. I mean, obviously, if I'm on an airplane, I'm not literally trapped, but I can't go anywhere. You know, if I'm not into the Wi-Fi, I can't do social media, I can't distract myself. Maybe there's something I can watch on YouTube or whatever if I've got the capability. But quite often those are great places for me to write, just because it's like there are fewer distractions than in my normal life, and I can just flow into this space of focus and concentration that becomes really delightful.
How much time do you spend crafting the ending of a story?
Sometimes, I think it depends on the ending of the story. There are pieces that I've written where I knew the ending first, where I just got an image, or I knew it ends up with X. And the question becomes, how do I get there? So sometimes that happens and the ending is not in doubt. It's just a matter of navigating toward it. Sometimes I know that I'm going to some sort of resolution with some characters, but I have no idea what it looks like. And then I'll have to try several endings, or I'll write it one way and then I'll let some readers read it, or I'll gather people to read it, or obviously I'll read it over myself and then I'll find something else, or I'll find something else. And sometimes it's a matter of substituting to see what the right ending is. I think there are a number of different ways to find an ending, and sometimes it's a roll of the dice as to which one is going to fit best. And sometimes that's about audience or sensibility or tone. I mean, that's the other thing too. Like if you're, Shakespeare ends his comedies, there's always there's stuff in nature, there's the forest, there's the meadow, there's something that lightens the mood. So am I going for an ending that's going to feel comic and hopeful? Am I going for an ending that's going to feel slightly despairing and sobering? And then what's the right moment of that? What's the right combination of events and words and people and circumstances and images that will help sort of land the plane in a way in terms of that story? Sometimes I just have to try a bunch of things out and see what happens. And I think, like every piece I write, they're all individual. Sort of it takes what it takes for this particular piece. Sometimes that's, months, sometimes it's been years. It's like, I don't know exactly where I'm going, or I can't really finish this, or I need this collaborator, and then I'll discover it eventually and find my way to whatever ending feels right.
And then with the writers that you work with, coaching, do they often know what the ending is when they approach you to look over their, analyze their screenplay?
Yeah, I think not always. I think it's sort of 50-50, actually. There are some people who know where they're going, and there are other people who just know what the journey is. And so it's really, I think I try to lean into my coaching process the way I lean into my own process, which is I try to meet myself wherever I am in terms of the work and sort of, I talk a lot about blessing the process. Like whatever it is, it's okay. I mean, to go back to my eating analogy, sometimes I'm like, this is definitely what I'm gonna have for dinner. And other times it's like, I don't quite know. What do I have in here? What can I make? What can I, sometimes I discover the taste along the way, and sometimes I know exactly what will satisfy me. And I think the same is true of my writing and the writing of people I work with.